Hi guys, this is your lecture for November 5th. We're going to be covering pages 134 through 142. Remember, it's always good to look back at your book when we cover pages in these lectures, just to get an even deeper idea of what we're talking about. Okay, so today we're starting chapter 13, and we're going to be talking about meat, poultry, and fish in this chapter. Today we're really going to be focusing just on meat. Okay, so what is meat? Well, meat is the edible tissue from cow, lamb, pig, and game. It's nutritious, it's high in protein. It contains minerals like iron, phosphorus, zinc, and copper. It contains vitamins like thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, and B12. It does have cholesterol and saturated fat in it, so it contributes to your cholesterol and saturated fat count for the day. So you always want to choose lean cuts, and of course you want to include meat in your diet in moderation. It's the safest to always eat everything in moderation. Okay, so meat is inspected by the United States Department of Agriculture, or the USDA, and the purpose of inspection is to make sure that the meat is of high quality. And they want to make sure that the animal isn't sick, that the meat, if consumed, is not going to make somebody sick. There's also a process called grading that the meat goes through, and grading is not required by law, but it is very common practice. So on Edpuzzle, I found a video for you to learn a little bit more about grading USDA beef quality. Grading is the name of the video, so please pause this video here and watch that video so you can learn a little bit more about what grading is. Okay, so let's talk about types of meat. There's multiple types of meat. There's beef, which we all know comes from cows. And there is veal, which actually comes from calves or baby cows that are 1 to 3 months in age. There's game, which can refer to animals such as caribou, deer, rabbit, and squirrel. Basically, those animals that people like to hunt for. Lamb of course, is meat that comes from young sheep, about 6 to 8 months old. There's mutton, which comes from sheep that are at least a year old. And then there's pork, which of course is the flesh of swine. And all of these types of meat have certain colorings, and you want to make sure that you know what the colorings are. They're actually listed in your book under each little section. If you want to go back and look at that, just because if you're ever shopping for beef or veal or game or so forth and so on, you want to know what the proper color is so you can pick out a good cut of meat. Okay, speaking of cut, you need to understand that there are different parts of an animal and that are divided into certain cuts. So there's the chuck, rib, loin, sirloin, round, shank, brisket, plate, and flake. Those are all the parts that a cow, for example, is divided into. So I found this video for you to watch that talks a little bit more about understanding the beef cuts. So pause the video here and watch the video on Edpuzzle that's all about understanding the beef cuts. Okay, so let's talk about meat labeling. When you go to the grocery store, there is going to always be a label on the package of meat that will provide you with good information that you need to take note of if you're trying to find good quality meat. So all packages of meat include on their label the name of the animal, whether it's beef or veal or pork, so forth and so on. The wholesale cut, which is the location on the animal. The retail cut, which is the type of meat cut such as roast or steak. The price, and this is by pound, per pound. The weight of the meat. The total price, and then the sell-by date. And you want to pay attention to that because sell-by date is going to influence pricing. Sometimes if you purchase something that's closer to the sell-by date, you can find it cheaper than otherwise. Okay, so when you're purchasing meat, you want to Definitely check for freshness. And meat should be the correct color. You know, for whatever animal it is, it needs to be the correct color. Check the sell-by date. Like I said earlier, if it's a little bit closer to the sell-by date, it will probably be less expensive. But also bear in mind that if you get something that's closer to the sell-by date, it needs to be meat that you're planning on eating sooner rather than later, or meat that you're planning on freezing. The package of a meat needs to be well sealed. Avoid any that leak. You don't really want there to be a whole lot of liquid in your meat package. There should be actually as little liquid as possible, really. You want to check and make sure that the package is very cold, so you're going to want to touch it. And you want to place your meat in a plastic bag. A lot of places provide plastic bags, which is good for you to put your meat in because you want to shop safely, because sometimes cross-contamination can occur. If there's meat that has bloody meat residue on the outside of the package and then it touches other food in your cart, then that's going to cause cross-contamination. So you want to be really careful about that. Also, you want to select your meat last or close to last because you want the meat to stay at a safe temperature for as long as possible. So you're not going to purchase it first at the beginning of your grocery trip, but second. If you live farther than 30 minutes from the store, it is advisable that you take a cooler with you just to place the meat in and other perishables that you might have purchased to keep them at a safe temperature for consumption. Okay, so how much meat should you buy? Well, the average amount of meat that you would give a person is about 2 to 3 ounces per serving, and this is based on weight after it is cooked. Meat actually shrinks when you cook it, and this has to do with the fact that fat and moisture are lost when you cook meat. So you're going to base how much you buy based upon the weight after it is cooked. And there's actually in your book a nice chart on page 137 that gives you some good tips for purchasing meat and based upon the weight and how many servings. Okay, so how should you store meat? Well, meat should always be at the bottom of your refrigerator because that's the coolest section of your refrigerator. And if it's not in your refrigerator, then it needs to be in your freezer, kept frozen at 0 degrees or lower. Meat can be used safely or frozen as long as 2 days after the sell-by date. When you're freezing meat, make sure that you, in order to maximize your storage space and that you're going to have the best quality meat possible after you thaw it, you're going to want to place the meat in a package, a freezer bag that's moisture-proof, vapor-proof, because you don't want there to really get any moisture in there because that will cause freezer burn to happen, and freezer burn can make the meat taste bad and it also helps promote rapid decay. Make sure you label what you are freezing because that's going to make it easier for you at a later time when you're looking through your freezer wondering what the meat is, and put the date that you froze the meat because even if you freeze something, it's not going to be good forever. It just depends on the type of meat, but all meat, even frozen, has an expiration date. So, for example, if you freeze beef, it's probably good up to 12 months, but if you freeze ham, it's probably good for up to 2 months. So beef 12 months, ham 2 months. There is a huge difference there. So how do we thaw meat? Well, the safest way to thaw meat is in the refrigerator, and so you're going to have to do a little bit of planning in order to thaw the meat. You're going to want to put the meat in a bag or shallow pan and place it at the bottom, the coldest part of the refrigerator, to let it thaw. And obviously it's going to take a little bit of time for this to thaw. So if you look on page 138 of your book, there is a meat thawing chart that talks about how much certain types of meat per pound take to thaw. So ground beef, for example, at 1 pound takes 12 to 24 hours to thaw. Make sure you do not thaw meat at room temperature because that's very dangerous because the outside of the meat is going to thaw faster than the inside of the meat, and there's going to be the incredibly huge possibility of bacteria developing, and it would be unsuitable to eat, and if anyone ate it, they could get sick. So the safest way to do it is in the refrigerator. Okay, so how do you handle meat? Well, it's very important to remember that you need to wash your hands with soap and water before and after handling raw meat. You're going to want to disinfect all utensils and surfaces that came into contact with the raw meat. You can use paper towels or disposable wipes to clean up raw meat messes. And you're also going to want to use a disinfectant of some sort, a food-safe disinfectant, to clean up the area where there might have been raw meat messes. Do not mix utensils used for raw meat with cooked meat. So, for example, if you're grilling, you might carry the patties out on a plate, and you're going to have a spatula that you're going to put the patties on the grill with. But you're not going to use that same spatula to take the cooked meat off. You're going to use a different spatula. It's always good to remember that meat must be kept below 40 degrees or above 140 degrees to avoid bacteria growth. And remember, bacteria growth, if it gets into the food, can make a person really sick if they consume it. Okay, so let's talk about cooking meats. Meats are excellent, but you can make them a little bit more excellent by seasoning meat. This enhances the flavor. So, for instance, if you marinate meat, it helps add flavor, and it can also tenderize the meat. But you only are going to marinate meat for up to 24 hours. After 24 hours, the texture will begin to deteriorate. You can also use a rub in which you take certain spices and rub the outside of the meat. This will produce a crusty outside texture and add flavor to the meat. You can also salt the meat if you want to, and there's also different types of seasoning mixtures that can be purchased, or you can make them at home to help enhance the flavor of your meat. There are multiple ways of cooking meat. We have two methods, the dry heat method and the moist heating method. With the dry heat method, tender cuts of meat are cooked using one of the following on the first column methods: roasting, broiling, pan broiling, microwave cooking, grilling, pan frying, stir frying, deep frying. Moist heating methods for meat are going to include braising, simmering, and stewing. So it just depends on what effect you want to achieve. If you look in your book, it gives a little bit more of a definition for each of these, although I imagine you've probably seen a lot of these in your daily life of seeing your parents cook or cooking yourselves. But you are going to want to choose the method based upon what outcome you want. Okay, so regardless of what method you chose, it's very important to check meat for doneness, and there's two methods to do this. There is the first method, which is check the temperature, and you're going to use a thermometer to check the temperature, and you're checking the center of the meat for its temperature, or you could check color for doneness. And of course, it's going to depend upon what you are cooking, but generally the color is going to be, you have to cut into the center of the meat and see the color there, and see what the color looks like there to determine doneness. So there are degrees of doneness. There's medium rare, there's medium, there's well done. It just depends. It depends on what temperature you cook the meat to, but all meat should be cooked at least to 145 degrees, and pork and ground beef must be cooked to 160 degrees. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about is grilling. Usually there's two types of grills. There's the charcoal grill and the gas grill. Charcoal grill uses charcoal, and the gas grill uses gas, and they both have their very unique flavors. It's best to use long-handled grilling tools. I'm sure you can imagine why, because if you get too close, you could get burnt. So you want to be as careful as possible. Before you start cooking, you're going to fire up the grill in advance. You're going to fire up a charcoal grill a little bit sooner than a gas grill because charcoal grills take longer to warm. You're going to check the temperature of the grill before placing the food on the rack. And it's important to know that with cooking or with grilling, there's two types of techniques, direct and indirect.